Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and you might be like, whoa, Muta, you can't hit me with the doomer stuff like that. I don't want to start these videos off with the big doom and gloom. I'm actually an anti-doomer in a lot of ways. So before we continue on this, I just want you to understand there's ways that you can fight back against the crazy shit that is happening all around us. It seems in the last year that things have ramped up and escalated so hard when it comes to locking down and controlling what we can and cannot do that to me, I make these videos to teach you guys and educate you on things that are happening around you that actually do affect you, right? They actually can have the possibility of affecting what is our hobby, whether it be gaming, whether it be playing on Linux with virtual machines, whether it be browsing the internet on our own free dime. This is something that, of course, you can fight back. I'm going to bring up some laws today that, again, have just dropped. It seems like every day there's like a new law that comes in, okay? I've never seen the government work together so fucking well when it comes to achieving this one thing, which is globally age verifying and locking down a lot of our systems. Now, as the title of this video would imply, I really think the goal here is to make Linux, at least for the consumer level, somewhat illegal, right? And that might be an extreme way of putting it, but bear with me, okay? Just stick around and let's get started with the front of this, okay? There's a lot to cover. Now, over the last 2 weeks, I talked about age verification on the operating system level, right? So we looked at laws from California, we looked at laws from New York, and, we even had big guys like System76, who are behind Pop! OS, and they actually sell Linux computers, even come out and talk about age verification at the OS level. A lot of these guys hate it. Everyone hates it. Unfortunately, the law is the law. If the law tells you to do something, you're probably going to do it. Otherwise, you're going to get penalties. You're not going to be able to fight that shit in court legally. You have to stop it now. Otherwise, it gets worse than it is. Now, to understand, a lot of these laws that are introduced, like California, are self-attestation, meaning that basically the goal for now is to put up a little screen that asks you for your age, your age or date of birth. And a lot of these guys, the lawmakers, come in thinking that, they're governing iPhones, Android devices, Windows computers, Mac OS systems. But they forget that Linux doesn't really have things like accounts, all right? There are users in Linux, but you're not really sending information out to anybody. Now we're getting to a point where a lot of these systems are considering adding in age verification, or they're ultimately thinking of, do we even want to serve a lot of these areas? Which might have been fine if 1 or 2 states, 1 or 2 countries was knocking down, but it seems like everybody's knocking down. So, interestingly, I saw something from the Attorney General in Florida over here. So it's time over. Time for negotiations are done. Big tech companies have 30 days from today to implement age restrictions on social media access for kids under 14 within 60 days. Parental consent must be in place for 14 to 16 years of age. Okay, so I want to listen to what this guy has said. Obviously, before we begin, I just want to talk about how loaded this shit is, right? So to give you an idea, the prosecuting child predators part is fucking hilarious to me, because this is coming from a government, by the way, that has handled the Epstein files in such a terrible manner that it feels like a lot of people in the government, some of the people at the top might have been doing something untowards with children, right? It's crazy to think that we are governed by actual pedophiles. But now, instead of actually, chasing after the leads that have been presented in those files, instead of going through and prosecuting shit, the American government has decided, all right, in piecemeal, we're just going to lock down and mass surveil people. You don't care about the children. If you gave even an iota of a shit about the kids, you would probably put some people behind bars. But they're not doing that, okay? The Epstein situation is just a situation here. It's not being acted on with the respect that it deserves. But I'm supposed to believe these guys actually care about kids? Come on now. Framing it like this is already a bad look, because they're trying to usher in mass surveillance, taking away your privacy under the guise of protecting children, meaning that if somebody like me questions them, this piece of shit and all these other fucking pieces of shit behind them will go, well, you don't care about kids? No, I do care about kids. I also care about the law. And you guys seem to be really good at fucking both the kids and the law. Anyways, let's get started here.
Look, parents have tough decisions to make. I do think parents need to reevaluate What is the appropriate age to give your kid a cell phone where they have the internet at their fingertips? When I was 15, 16 years old, that didn't exist yet. So today, you see kids now, and I know, my 5-year-old daughter is so smart and so cute and so persuasive. It's hard for me to say no to her. I can only imagine what it's like when suddenly she's 13 or 14 and all the other kids have them. So that is a tough decision to make. I'll tell you this, she's not getting a phone at 14 or 15 years old. No way. TikTok, very, very dangerous. We see a lot of predatorial activity there, a lot of pornography that's still on the site. We're working to hold them accountable. We have a recently passed piece of legislation, SB 3, that says under 14, it's illegal for these social media sites to let them on. 14 to 16, you can have access, but only after explicit parental approval. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals recently upheld that law. It is the law of the land. And we're giving companies, really until another 30 days from now to get straight with regard to the under 14, 60 days to ensure parental consent is in place, and then we will begin filing lawsuits as fast as you can see.
So this guy is giving that little smug laugh here. Basically, what they're saying is that the social media companies in this point, they have to effectively prove that they're not reaching minors, right? And the only way that they can do that is by verifying every single account through all of these age verification methods. Some of these verification methods, like Discords, for instance, where information has unfortunately been leaked out for hackers to grab, and there's been reported information, of this thing called Infutor, for instance, where like 676 million consumer records were out. Obviously, I haven't confirmed this entirely myself, but if it's true and a vast amount of information is out there, 676 million is literally almost double, I believe, what the current US population is. So I imagine a lot of this also includes, like they say, deceased people. I haven't verified this information for myself, but you can imagine in a world where these tech companies do the bare minimum of treating our shit with any form of security, do you honestly think this isn't going to be a big minefield down the road? Forget the data surveillance, forget the mass surveillance shit, that's bad, but imagine if a bunch of hackers start getting access to things like your address, date of birth, social security numbers, driver identification, all of that crazy stuff. That's what these scumbag politicians don't really think of. Now, in the mind of this politician, he's trying to think that he's doing a good thing by like forcing these social media companies to age verify. But in reality, he's not really being truthful in saying that a lot of these platforms, and I'll show you it really quickly. Do you run Ubuntu, for instance, Linux? You know that there's parental controls on Linux right now. Parents can look through and restrict web browsers, applications, installing applications, restricting them by an age group that you do on your own local system. No need to collect anything, just you being a fucking parent. Of course, hey, what if you have an iPad? Well, you can actually control your kids' iPad usage through Apple's various parental control features baked right into the fucking system. Oh, did you buy your kid a MacBook? Well, congratulations, not only are they running ClaudeBot, but you can lock that shit down using parental controls without ruining my experience on the fucking internet. You know, there's also Microsoft Family Safety. You know, one credit I'll give Microsoft, they also have great family controls. And you know what the best part is? You even get little notifications on your cell phone if little Timmy's trying to access sites that little Timmy shouldn't be accessing. Oh, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. What about a gaming console? Did you buy your kid a PlayStation? Well, you can get the PlayStation Family app and monitor exactly what your kid's doing online. So there are ways to monitor and control your children and what they do on the internet. These politicians are basically not even, reality, I would support this if all these politicians did was educate parents about this kind of behavior. You know what's really funny to me is if all the social media stuff is so bad for your mental health, why do we not implement a way, and I don't even agree with this either, but if you're going to buy a tablet, if you're going to buy a smartphone that exposes you to the scary internet, why not have the actual agent at the store, like the actual cashier, like you would go to a bar, verify your driver's license before they sell you such a dangerous product, right? But Muda, what if kids need a computer for their school? Well, the school can provide that, and you know what the school can also do? Lock that bitch down. You ever get a laptop for work? You know how monitored and surveilled that laptop is? Because if you do anything other than work, everyone in the cyber department will just fucking know what you're doing. Do you know what's really interesting too? If computers and the internet are so dangerous, why do you give a child a loaded handgun? You know, that might be a big jump for some people. Do you get a Glock? Do you put a magazine full of rounds in it? Do you rack the slide back, make sure one is loaded in the chamber, and hand it off to little Timmy? If the answer to that is yes, check yourself into a fucking police station and never ever allow yourself near a child, let alone another human being. If the answer to that is no, I wouldn't let a child have a fucking loaded gun, congratulations, that's the most basic parenting, that's the most basic adult shit that you can do. Do you let a child have access to a bottle of Everclear or Grey Goose vodka or whatever the fuck you want to drink? No! Because alcohol is bad. You don't give it to children. Do you just give a nudie magazine to a child? No, you don't. So if the internet is so dangerous and these phones and these tablets allow these kids to enter a world of intense grooming, why is there not at least an at-sale check that could verify if an adult is purchasing for them, right? We do it for video games. You know, you go to a GameStop, you know, a little 12-year-old goes and, you know, says, I want to buy Grand Theft Auto 6. Well, little kid, do you have your parent with you so I can see their ID? Why don't we do that? Why don't these politicians push for that instead of these social media sites and the verification right there? Look, I don't agree with locking down hardware like that, but at the end of the day, these fucking politicians have made it so annoying and it's so transparent that the only thing they care about is the internet that they want to control. Now, at least in Florida's case, they're putting the blame on the actual social media company. But in other cases, and this is where it gets really, really scary too. And it's also funny to me that guys like Ron DeSantis, who are championing the whole thing about we don't like any form of digital ID. Brother, what do you think the social media stuff is going to be? It is in a roundabout way digital ID. It's mass surveillance. So again, you can't trust these politicians. Now this bill, SB 3977, actually talks about, again, the Children's Social Media Safety Act. Now this one says literally no later than January 1st, 2028, so there's actually 2 years till this happens. But again, I talked about all this stuff like literally years before, and now we're here. Now we're sitting here looking at this crazy shit, okay? Now I'm making more videos because we didn't listen back then, so hopefully we'll listen now. So over here they talk about it and they say an operating system provider shall provide an accessible interface at account setup that requires the account holder to indicate the birth date, age, or both. Then provide an operator who has requested a signal with respect to the particular user a signal that identifies, so again, the age range right over here. And 3, send only the minimum amount of information necessary to comply with the provision. Provides that an operator shall not offer a platform in the state without conducting age verification as required under the Act to determine whether the user is a minor. So the way that that law reads to me is, you know, unless the operating system that you're using, the operating system that is running in your state, unless it has some level of age verification and a signal to pass on, it's not going to be allowed. Now, here's the really scary part about this situation, right? First off, these age verification laws have blown up to the point that even weather applications, for instance, this is a real screenshot, I verified this myself, a weather app required me to provide my age range. You have to be 18 years old, so your experience in this app isn't limited to child or teen content. What the fuck could a child be seeing on the weather? Is the moisture gonna freak that kid out and give him some crazy signs? What's going on here? But again, the thing about all this is that when these operating systems ask for it, one thing you have to understand is a lot of people, including me, have went down the rabbit hole. And a lot of people that are pushing for the operating systems to be responsible are actually backed by organizations like Meta, obviously the guys behind Facebook and WhatsApp. And the reality of it is that there's 2 templates that are being shown around, the App Store Accountability Act and the Digital Age Assurance Act. So the reality is both result in universal age verification. The difference is who builds it. Is it the social media site or is it the actual operating system? Now, of course, the thing about it is Meta apparently is paying a lot of the lobbying costs for this shit. And a lot of people went down, for instance, looking at these child advocacy groups that were demanding these App Store accountabilities. They started following the money in the situation. When the actual senators asked for a yes or no answer on which tech companies were providing funding, they basically confirmed that they get money, but they didn't want to name them. Which is interesting to me because I want to know who the fuck is paying you guys for pushing these App Store laws. So ultimately, at the end of the day, Bloomberg did confirm by themselves that it might have actually just been Meta. So why would somebody like Meta pay money for this? Why would companies pay millions of dollars to push this law? Remember, there are laws like COPPA, which I think are great because they protect children from having their information grabbed by these scummy tech companies. But let's say, for example, we have operating systems where you pass age verification, right? So in your operating system, let's say that it reports that you're 16 years of age, or 15, for instance. And now the social media site, grabs or asks your computer for your age range. So now the social media company knows, without knowing who you are, what your age range is. So it's identified this blip is 15 years of age. Now, through a various amount of other trackers and fingerprinting, it can verify who you are without even getting your name. It's that invasive on the internet. So a lot of these tech companies basically can violate COPPA, from my understanding, and grab information they're not supposed to and not even be liable for it. It's a fucking insane way to push targeted advertising, and in a roundabout way, because of the information being subpoenaed, it leads to things like mass surveillance. Again, you have to really look deep into the story. That's why these videos are long. That's why these videos can be confusing, because you have to look deep into this story. If you don't look deep enough, you don't understand how invasive and how predatory these companies actually are. They don't care about kids, they just care about making more money at the expense of your privacy and even your children's privacy to an extent. Now, thankfully, it's not all doom and gloom. For instance, some of these laws, like Senate Bill 2420, have actually been blocked in Texas, restricting kids from things like app stores. So a federal judge has actually jumped in and said that this violates things like your free speech rights, which I actually tend to agree. The act is akin to a law that will require every bookstore to verify the age of every customer at the door, and for minors require parental consent before the child or teen could enter, and again when they try to purchase a book. So it's a pretty accurate way of looking at it, because no matter what, this law does lead to censorship. Who decides what is adult material? Who decides what material you have to lock behind an age gate? That is an interesting way to look at this stuff too, right? You have to, again, look deep into these stories. And look, ultimately, at the end of the day, when it comes to Linux, right, a lot of these actual organizations, they're not going to have the money to fight this kind of stuff. A lot of Linux, a lot of Linux distributions, like for instance, Midnight BSD, they're not Linux, they're BSD based. But they've had to implement actual license changes where they said, look, if you're in any country, territory that requires this crap, you're not authorized to use our system. And even though this might seem like a pretty stopgap fix, not everyone can do this. For instance, Valve distributing things like SteamOS. Valve will have to introduce methods like this, age verification stuff, into their system, because they sell hardware and they sell software in all of the states that we've mentioned, all of the countries that we've mentioned here. So regardless, there's going to be big Linux distributions that are actually run by big companies that have to actually contribute to this bullshit. They have to play by these dumb rules. Now, thankfully, in that case, there's still so many other distributions like in this list that we can all switch to. So for instance, what these politicians don't get is that you might be able to lock down something like Ubuntu, but you probably won't be able to lock down something like MX Linux. You probably won't be able to lock down something like NixOS or something that's outside the purview. But what happens if laws start passing where the people chairing these projects are actually living? That's a scary world. It feels like, again, a lot of these laws right now are self-attestation, and you might be like, well, that doesn't mean that they're collecting information. The problem is the framework is there. So in a year from now, when the politicians realize it's not invasive enough, they can just keep creeping the law higher and higher and higher, right? Remember, a lot of these laws started off with, people blocking pornography sites, and it sounded like a pretty noble goal. Now we're at a point where, weather sites are asking you for age ranges. We're getting to a point where, the most anemic looking social media site now needs to play by these rules as well too. It's expanded so much so quickly. Now thankfully there's also people that are fighting back against this. This individual by the name of Hapless Idiot actually did produce and talk about the age verification bypass method. So here they do talk about, again, what is going on. So inside the buses for Linux systems, they look at something known as Free Desktop and the various age verification systems that could be implemented in there. And of course, ultimately, he has a sanctuary protocol for people achieving sovereignty. So right over here, he does say that, listen, and this is a great example of it too. How would you verify things like headless systems? How would you, deal with automated environments, GitHub Actions, things like virtual machines, for instance, too, which are also operating systems running within operating systems. He talks about things like de-anonymization. So, when you make a Linux account, like for instance, my Linux account is my name, add Overlord, which is my system's host name. This account was not made using an internet service. It was something that I made using one line on the terminal, just wrote in my name, gave myself permissions, and did it all locally. What happens when now that private space is now being tied to a state-issued identification system? I think he says it right. While we fight the measured silence of corporate developers is a blueprint of our digital cages. We believe that an operating system belongs to the user, not the state. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, a gamer, or a sysadmin running headless nodes in Cahokia Heights, you deserve a system that doesn't demand your papers to run a sudo command. The true hand is shown. The nonprofit mask is slipping. I bypassed Red Hat's dbus and survived the permafrost on Telegram staff unfroze me and wished me good luck. This tool is for educational and system hardening purposes. By using the script, you're asserting your right to digital privacy and the sovereignty of your own hardware. That, to me, is probably the most succinct and honest way to put it. None of these organizations, none of these government guys give a shit about you or your kids. All they care about is locking down your system. And it used to be wait a year for these laws to pass, but in some cases, the laws have already passed. And in some cases, they're only giving 30 days before all these organizations. And sometimes it's the social media, sometimes it's the operating system. Point is, no matter what, it's a bad situation all around. But ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and yeah, I feel like I know that I'm talking about this a fair bit, but the only way to win against this is to educate yourself and know that in some cases there are some wins, but in order to keep getting more wins, you have to bring this up at your local level. I don't ever like to get involved in things like politics. Like for me, I'm not understanding of a lot of it, but I do understand that when these politicians who, to be honest with you, I think a lot of them are just complete fucking scumbags. But when those scumbags are pushing for systems that are reducing your safety, your privacy, at some point, you have to stand up and you have to talk against it. And honestly, you have to fight back. You just have to. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it.